Artie, I feel kind of strange having my sermon recorded today, because I wanted to do the sermon I was going to do. So you're going to record it anyway? She's going to record it anyway. Yeah. I'm the rector, but everybody else is in charge. That's just the way it is. I guess where I'd like to start is a couple of news bites ago, or maybe it was even the last one, maybe two ago. Since I'm changing my sermon, I'm going to be thinking as I talk. I referred to what happened in Connecticut, that really, really horrible thing. And whenever I refer to some sort of incident like that, I'm not quite sure what to say, because especially for people who actually might find this on YouTube, I don't want to just assume knowledge and understanding, but on the other hand, I don't want to spend 5 or 10 minutes talking about how horrible that was. Nor do I want to spend 5 or 10 minutes talking about how not unique it was. And in fact, and this is, I hope this part comes across right and doesn't sound very bizarre, but after that incident and hearing the guy from the NRA talk about how principals should be armed, or there should be armed guards in school, and then that week there were some firemen killed. So obviously now we got our firemen. And then Christmas Eve, St. Mary's was broken into. So I guess maybe what we need is we need the clergy packet now. And I was thinking, like, when are we going to realize that if you repeat the same insanity, you're going to get the same insanity as a result? You know, it's not working, folks. It's not working. And we have to look at a new way. We have to look at a new way of going forward. I don't think that reflex reactions or responses are going to have a whole lot of success. They may make us feel good in the short term, but we got to really understand that something fundamental at the core of society has gone wrong. I'm going to say that again. That something at the core of our society has gone wrong. And in this news bites that I sent out before Christmas, I put in something there, and I'm going to be developing it over time in the parish, because it really, to me, speaks of a call to the church today, and it's kind of strange we're so few in number today. People were saying after what happened in the town of Kirkland that the churches would be full. People don't go back to church these days anymore, because church, except for those who are out committed, isn't a place of solace and comfort. It's a place where they just don't understand what's going on. So why would they flock back to a place where they don't understand? But I wrote in the news bites that one of the things that we're going to have to look at as a society is the issue of being tribal versus being community. And I want to talk about that a little bit this morning, because there is a call to us as a collective and as individuals as well. And in one sense, I'm going to give the punchline now and then work up to it. But here's a bit of the punchline. Church is, or church at least should be, one of the places in society where a very eclectic and diverse group of people come together around similar goals and purposes. Now I want to talk about tribalism and community for a little bit. And this is a sermon. This is not a treatise. It's not a PhD thesis. So the shallowness will be obvious to all of you, but I hope it's worth some thinking. One of the books that I never appreciated, or I didn't appreciate reading when I was in high school, and frankly that's because it was presented so badly, was the book Lord of the Flies. To me this was tedious, awful, horrible drudgery. And I wasn't a scholar at the best of times, but man, if you got me thinking in the right way, I would really key in on something, key in on important themes. But it was easy to turn me off, and the way it would really turn me off. And it was years later when I was in Seja, that I had to reread Lord of the Flies as part of an English course I was taking in Seja. And then I think as punishment for my sins in an English course I took in McGill, I had to reread it again. And I got to say, each time I read it, I got more interested in it. And then actually did it as recreational reading again, because some of the themes that I saw emerging there, I saw as absolutely incredibly powerful. And I don't want to talk about the whole book, and I would assume that many of you, if not most of you, have read the book. But what it is about is it takes place during the Second World War, where a group of English private school kids are being shipped off so that they can be safe from what's happening in England. Okay? And their plane goes down. So the context that you've got, the social context you've got is the empire, British Empire, is coming to an end. There is illusion and delusion happening. What's that show you watching? What is it? Downton Abbey. I was watching a little thing on TV yesterday about the making of Downton Abbey, and I don't think it's going to be either, but anyway, it talks about how this was structured to be, it's the end of the Edwardian summer, which wasn't just one summer, it was like a period of time. And the British Empire is falling to pieces, and then particularly after the First World War, all the things that were known and held as community values or social values, whether it was good or bad, everything was being turned up on its head. And then the Second World War comes along in this context in which what used to be considered the way is no longer the way. What used to be considered good is considered challengeable. The class system is under assault, etc., etc., etc. So everything is just like somebody's pushed the scramble button on British society. So that was the social context. Community wasn't as it had formerly been understood. Okay? The notion of community had changed, and some would say that community had begun to dissolve. The British identity had begun to dissolve. And so it's in this context that these private school kids, which they call public school in Britain, because Britain obviously here, these private school kids were in this airplane that crash landed on this island. And then you see the evolution of human prototypes. You've got leaders, you've got followers, you've got bullies, you've got aggressors, you have perpetrators, you have combatants, you have philosophers. And I don't know a whole lot about the genius behind the story, but it seems to me that a lot of the characters in the story are prototypes, are prototypical of different types of human behavior. If you go into any schoolyard, you see it. You see the leaders, you see the followers, both genders. You see the bullies, you see the victims, you see the philosophers, you see the students, you see the nerds, the geeks. We have different names for them, but they've always been around. And then in the course of the book, what happens is the tribes break up. And they associate and affiliate around various manifestations of power. And then there's challenges to the social order, etc., etc., etc. And it seems to me that what happens when society loses its internal cohesion is you degrade into that sort of environment. I have said before in sermons that if you quarrel with the notion that we need external forces to enforce standards, you need look no further than the Stanley Cup riots or the Halifax police strike. When the police go on strike, people aren't there saying, "Oh, wonderful, now is an opportunity to prove just how good we are." That's not what happens. Now, it's not everybody, but there are the protagonists, the aggressors, the bullies, the violent, and what happens is society begins to degrade. And I think what you see in Lord of the Flies is exactly that, in the context in which, on a macroscopic level, the British Empire has begun to disintegrate or disintegrate in the literal sense of the term. You got these kids who are brought up in that disintegrated society, all of a sudden find themselves on their own with only their own resources, and you see what happens. They become quite primitive. And I really feel that that's what's going on in our society in some ways, that we are reverting to a very primitive, tribal prototype. And I feel that one of the things that's preventing us from actually seeing that is technology. Now, I'm not suggesting in any way here that technology is bad, nor am I suggesting that it is contributing to this, though it may. But what I'm suggesting is some of us, one of the things that's preventing us from perceiving just how primitive we're becoming, how we're reverting to primitive type, is technology. because technology speaks of modernity and advancement. We've always seen technology as moving forward into new realms, space, the final frontier, and all that sort of stuff. We see technology as answer, not as either causal or reflective of problems in society. Okay? I'm not suggesting that technology is necessarily causal, but a while ago it was questioned whether the violence of video games, for example, encouraged violence. There's very little question about that anymore. It doesn't create a violent personality type, but there's a synergy that happens there. Okay, so we're living in a very technological time in which the opportunities to use technology for good and for ill are very much available to us. Another thing, we're in an incredibly wealthy time. Despite the fears about the fiscal cliff and all the rest of those fears that we've been experiencing over the last little while, when I started thinking these thoughts before Christmas, the fiscal cliff was still not resolved in the States. It was talking about going back into recession. Well, even the States, even Canada in recession, are staggeringly wealthy. Staggeringly wealthy. We have access to resources. We have access to stuff unheard of in human experience. And not only do we have access to it, we're programmed and conditioned to believe that that stuff we need. That it's not wants anymore. It's we need that stuff. And even further than we need that stuff, we're entitled to that stuff. So what do you do if you feel thwarted? How do you respond if you're not getting your way? How do you respond if you feel somehow marginalized or on the fringes of things? And I think, again, you see that's one of the things that we're seeing in what I would perceive as an increasing tribalization of our society. If you look at the way kids play, and you look at the way adults play, I believe strongly that you'll find some evidence for what I'm talking about here, tribalism as opposed to community. You will see that old saying that my mom taught me a long time ago, like attracts like, is more true than ever, perhaps. And of course, none of these things are universally the case. No study of humanity is ever 100% one thing or 100% another. That's just not the way people are. But I really do think that what you will see is as the cohesive things in society have less and less power, less and less authority, and less hold on people, what you'll see is other things taking their place. Sometimes it's technology, sometimes it's clothing, sometimes it's hairstyle, sometimes it's music, sometimes it's violence. If you feel pushed out, marginalized, and ostracized, you will react to it. Some will respond by withdrawal, some will respond with suicide, some will respond with anger and aggression. And in a technological time, the opportunities to express that aggression in some incredibly destructive ways are rampant. And I would suggest that if we're looking at somebody going into an elementary school with a semi-automatic assault rifle, Bushmaster, we see that as horrible as it is, as horrible as that is, and as just anathema to everything we stand for, that is, I would say that is only one side of the aggressive tip of the iceberg. When you look at what's going on in cyberspace, you see some stuff that's going on that's really, really awful. When you look in the playgrounds, I remember a couple of years ago, this is sort of an aside that wasn't in my original thinking, but I'm throwing it in. I was speaking once with the principal of a local elementary school, and she, God bless her, wonderfully intentioned woman. She was part of this peaceful schools thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not suggesting we should have schools of war, but the peaceful schools thing. And she really believed that she had turned her school into a peaceful school, and she just couldn't see that what had happened was the bullying and the destructive stuff had just moved 50 yards away. I also was remembering one of our former youth group students who was a star in school. And they had this thing where it was conciliation, peer counseling, and remediation, and all the rest of that. And they would bring, a bully together with a victim, and together with a peer, and it was peer mediation. And she hated to have been singled out as one of the peer mediators. The school thought that they were rewarding her for being what all parents wish they had as a daughter. She saw it as being marked with a bullseye. So that's what's going on. That's some of what's going on. So what I'm suggesting is, as centrally cohesive things in our society cease to have influence and power and control, we see an increase in tribalization and an increase in people affiliating around stuff, sometimes destructive, sometimes very constructive. Like, let's face it, one of the things that some of the kids are affiliating around is, I'll just throw one thing out, athletics. You're not necessarily going to see that as destructive unless and until it becomes so. Then there's a question of parents and their tribal identity, and why are you pushing your kids so hard? It strikes me as odd. Can I just throw this in? Because this part of the sermon isn't a sermon, this is a rant. I can't come to youth group because I got an exam. But I will go to my hockey practice, which is at 9:30. I'll be on the ice till 10:30. Then I got to unwind till 11:30, and I have to have my snack and my shower, and then I got to do my homework, and I'm going to go to bed at 1 or 2 o'clock a.m. Finally, the adrenaline out of my system. There's something wacko there. There's something a little bit off base. So I think we have to look at parents and how they contribute to tribalization as well. So, I said tribalization, or tribalism and community. And as you could well expect, I could just carry on for a long time with this tribal thing, but I got to move on. Community. It seems to me that one of the things that's different between community and tribalism is community is finding yourself where you find yourself. And there's nothing wrong, as I say, I don't believe there's anything essentially wrong with affiliating with a common interest group or anything like that. I think there's something myopic about it if that's all you do. But nonetheless, some of us, or maybe most of us, grew up in a time when community really did hold some sway. And because I'm so old, I can refer to my upbringing now. I remember one time, my mother just, Lorne, do not ride double on a bicycle. Because of course all kids want to ride double on a bike, right? Do not ride double on a bicycle. Oh, no, Mom. You know what's coming, right? So Gordon Burroughs picks me up, and we walk down the court, my house is in the back of the court. Bye, Mom. Turn the corner, go down to Monkland and Royal, turn left onto Monkland, way out of sight of my mother. And my mother was not the type to come and just sort of jog around the corner to see. Jump on his handlebars. By the time I got home, my mother knew that I had been with Gordon Burroughs, who she didn't like. Sorry, Gordon, if you're listening to this, she didn't like him. And knew that I'd written down. This was the day, by the way, where time was so innocent that you could go out on Halloween and eat an apple without having to worry about having a razor blade in it. Where you got peanuts on Halloween and you could eat them without being afraid of being poisoned or something. There was really a sense of community identity. And if you looked at church on a Sunday, I would guess that there were probably not too many people that could give a good theological treatise on why they were there. They were there. The old, the young, the tall, the short, the fat, the skinny, the geeks, the nerds, the cool, the not cool. I remember Linda Harrison. Linda Harrison was gorgeous. Man, she's gorgeous. She's also 2 years older than me, which in those days makes a huge difference. She's gorgeous. And she was a member of my church. She'd show up every now and then. And I got to say, I remember thinking as a young kid, why is someone so gorgeous at church? It's just because that's what You did. It was a place where the community gathered. And community had to do with geographic boundary. It had to do, sure, with economics. It had a lot more to do with race than any of us would have liked to admit. But there was a sense that despite the fact that, you're different from us, and, my dad's blue collar, or your dad's management, or da-da-da-da-da, we're in this geographic area and there is a sense of community. And with community comes accountability. Accountability comes in many forms. It doesn't mean that Mrs. Spindon across the street on Hampton had the right to smack me if I took some crab apples off a crab apple tree. She never did, by the way. She's a very nice lady. It doesn't mean she has that right. But she has the connection with my family that would lead her to communicate to my family some of my inappropriate behaviors. And when I started to smoke at the young and tender age of 12 years old, because I won't leave it came back. It came back. And when it became a more public than hidden thing, my parents got all sorts of feedback about what I was up to. In fact, my parents got feedback about things that I was up to that I wasn't really up to. And that's a downside of community as well. But community is a place where an individual is identified and where an individual is, in one way or another, held to account. Now, there can be a destructive side to that as well. There can be gossipy community. There can be hate in place. We all hear stories about growing up in small towns and how destructive that can be in some ways, positive in others. But community is a place where even in disparity, there is accountability. Okay? As opposed to tribalism, where you try to limit variety as much as possible. So, summary of this. Tribalism limits variety, and in that isolation, I think we see emerging some things that can turn very destructive, that encourage the continued dissolution of society. Community expresses variety and calls for accountability within that variety. Okay? So, church is supposed to be a community. It's supposed to be a variety. And if I may dare to refer to the Bible, I can say, minister on that. When you look at the calling of the disciples, you see almost the polar opposite of a homogeneous group of people. If ever there was a more disparate, eclectic group of people chosen to be the initial core, it was the disciples. You see fishermen, tax collectors, you see it all. And I don't believe that Jesus did that by accident. I don't believe he was walking down the street, tripped over his own sandal, and when he came up with his face full of sand, looked and saw some fishermen and said, that was a sign from God that I'm supposed to choose you. It wasn't like that. There was an intentionality about what Jesus did. And I believe he was teaching us a lesson about the way our community is supposed to be. Our community is supposed to be inclusive. It is to be varied. It is to be all of the things that speak of what happens when people come together around a common purpose, but from various points and various perspectives. Okay? So the church is called to be community. And it seems to me that if you agree with me on this, like if I know I'm giving the whole thing of principles of community like short shrift, but if you agree at least with the principle, understanding that in a sermon you can't do all your footnotes. If you agree with that in principle, and if you agree the church is supposed to be community in principle, then what you then have to do as one of the corollaries, as well as building that community, is speak into an increasingly tribalized society about that community. And say, whether you feel you're a star, or whether you feel that you're ostracized, whether you feel that you have something to offer, or whether you don't, you have a place in our church. And isn't that what it's about? When we talk about recognizing people's gifts and calling forth people's gifts, that society tells you this is what you need to be to be affirmed and loved and wanted and included and supported and valued. What church says, very, very different. Come because essentially you are valued. And quite apart from anything you do or accomplish, essentially you are valued. And as a valued member of our community, valued by us because you are first valued by God, and we're starting to get it, that if He values you, we should as well. And within that context of acceptance, integration, affirmation, support, challenge, which are all elements of community, within that, you will find out things about yourself that you don't even know presently. You might find out that you have a skill set that you never were aware of. Because in our social context, lots of other stuff is being reinforced, but your skill set isn't. Because it's not cool, or it's not this, or it's not that. It's a not, as opposed to an inclusion thing. You will discover within community that you have personality traits and characteristics and thought processes and ways of dealing with life that are supremely valuable to the building of community and to the shorthand helping of people. Now, when I say this, doesn't that sort of ring a little bit of the bell that already read in the gospel with the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness hasn't overcome it? Like, that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about light and darkness. And what I'm suggesting is that within community, we're turning on the lights. And it's a bit at a time, maybe not as well as we should be doing it, because one of the things about becoming a community is you discover each other's warts and wounds, as well as each other's strengths. But we're doing it a bit. And we're saying whatever else is going on out there, and it's not all bad, I'm not saying that, but whatever else is going on out there, here is a place where you can really truly be and really truly become who you are and who you can be. So it's a message, a gospel of affirmation. And if I could do one final bit of here on this Luke 10 a fair bit this way. I also believe that when Jesus had built his community, he was really clear to say, it's not just for you. It is for you. But now that you're a part of this and you're benefiting from it, it's not just for you. It's for others as well. And so what you have become in community and what you are being sustained as because of your community, now I want you, says Jesus, to take it out into the world. Let's start with some baby steps. Let's not start by going to deepest, darkest Africa or the most pagan continent on the world or in the world or anything like that. Go to your neighbor. Take a little step, a little trip down the road. Go to the next town. Go to the next village, is almost the way Luke 10 reads it. Go into the towns and villages. And knock on doors. So go to your neighbor's door. You don't have to go to British Columbia or the States or just go to your neighbor's door, knock on the door, and confer the peace that you have received and the sense of value that you have received as part of community. Confer that on them. Share it with them. If they receive it, you're going to know it right away. And if they reject it, you're going to feel it flung back in your face. Now that's not quite the way Jesus words it, but that's really what's being said. Shalom, your neighbor. And if your peace rests on your neighbor, enjoy the hospitality. Enjoy what that relationship leads to. That's how you build the kingdom of God. And if they reject it, don't judge them for it. Don't condemn them. Don't beat them up. Don't consign them to hell, because that's not your job. Just go to the next neighbor. And the next one. And the next one. And the next one. And see what happens. Because that's how the kingdom of God is built. It's built one community at a time. And then as the community grows, it splits. And as it grows again, it splits again. And as it grows again, it splits again. And this wisdom that Jesus had in saying, go to your neighbor first, and the times that he was living in, which in some ways is the most incredibly violent and destructive times that had been seen, but also times of opportunity, because with the Roman Empire came transportation and to trade and all the rest of it, within such a short period of time. The message had gone around the whole of the civilized world. It's incredible. I think we're living in the same time of opportunity, and I think we're living in a similar time of distress. Opportunity and distress, it seems to me, go hand in hand. So, even though we are few in number here this morning, we'll probably be much fewer next week, we're few in number here, we are no less or none the less called to live in community. My children, our children, are your children too. And you have a responsibility to them. And you have a responsibility for them. You have a responsibility to model grace for my kids. Because I know with my charm and wit and personality and all my incredible skills, not to mention hers, that despite the glory of living with me as a father, they're going to rebel against me someday. And they're going to trash some of the good things, throw out with the trash some of the good things as well as some of the bad things. But they're going to need somebody else who will still be modeling for them the good. So that part of their rebellion against dad, which is part of identity formation and all the rest of that sort of stuff, might be to affiliate with one of you. And I could just hope to God and literally pray to God that Jackie and Alice and all the others like you are still around when my kids become teenagers. So that's one aspect of it. You have a responsibility to my kids. You do. And in order to fulfill your responsibility, you have to be here. You have to show up to play. And that doesn't mean every single Sunday, so don't feel bad if next week you decide to go on brunch instead of church, but just invite me. But that's one aspect of it. And I got to say this. Just this morning, I was talking with one of our parishioners. I've been in contact with them several times a week. Lovely people. I'm also not going to mention the name, but they just found out that the mother, the wife, has a serious form of cancer. The reason they found out is because her collarbone was broken by the size of the growth, and spent New Year's Eve in the hospital. This is a very difficult situation, and I hate to cheapen it almost by giving it such short shrift. But this is a difficult time, and we have an obligation as their community to pray and to express concern and to show up in any way that we are given permission and called to, whatever the circumstance warrants. Sometimes it's more obvious when you got a caller on what your role is, but we are their Christian community. We owe them our love and our support as it's invited. We're not talking about invasion space here. And then there's the other stuff. I got to finish here, of course, but it's not all about us, and it's not all about our community. It's not all about getting our needs met or you meeting my kids' needs because I believe that you meet my kids' needs and all the rest of that. Our obligation is to the world as well. That we have an obligation to the world. It's not a tin of tuna, a tin of sardines and a tin of peas. Is that what it was? Yeah. We have an obligation to the world. $450 billion spent annually on Christmas in the States. And that's the Advent Conspiracy website if you ever want to go there. $450 billion spent on Christmas. $10 billion would provide fresh drinking water for every man, woman, and child on this planet. Today, as we wake up, brush our teeth, go to the bathroom, take our shower, have our breakfast, come to church, go home, have our lunch, have an afternoon snooze, play our games, watch television, eat our supper, kids have their baths, get ready for bed, go to bed, fall asleep, wake up, listen to CBC for a couple of hours because you can't get back to sleep. In that time frame, 35,000 children will die of starvation. 35,000 children. to die of starvation. There's several more sermons in that. We have an obligation as a community to reach out. And if it sounds too far to say 35,000 children will die of starvation within a 24-hour period, we can talk of Mile End Mission and their cupboards being empty of food because of all sorts of cutbacks. Or we can talk about Little Burgundy. Or we can talk about St. Michael's Mission, which needs underwear and socks and soap and razors. Just some of this. We have an obligation. I don't have any ending, because this is what I did talk about this morning. This morning my sermon was going to be about the wise man, and I was going to start with a little joke talking about, why were they wise? It's because they stopped asking for directions. The wise man and the non-wise man. You've all heard that before, which is why most of you didn't. Okay, sorry. But then I was going to talk about the difference between being smart and being wise. Well, maybe I should have stuck with that. Maybe that would be better, but maybe not. But I've chosen to do this instead. And there is no conclusion to it. But we need to live out the conclusion in our community. Where there's a space for everybody, where there's a welcome for everybody, and where everything you have to offer is needed for the sake of the community, for your own sake, and for the sake of the world around us. So there you go. A little extemporaneous, but obviously I've been doing some thinking about it. And I hope that somewhere in there you can find something in the challenge. And you said amen just a little tiny bit too quickly. I want to tell you something but I'm nuts. Y'all know that. I've been around long enough. You've been around long enough that you know that I'm nuts. You know that I never stop thinking. I wish I could. Sometimes I really wish I could switch off my brain, but I can't. Can I tell you a story? And this is going to take just another 3 minutes. The kids are going to be joining us, abbreviated community. I guess about a month ago, I was driving on Elmira, where Amy's mom lives, because I was picking her up to take her to the Dallas. It was garbage day, And sometimes the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. My dad used to cruise people's garbage because he was just stunned by some of the things in one of their neighbors' garbage was a scooter. Okay, a scooter, like a kid's scooter, 2 wheels, handle? Okay. And I looked at it and I was thinking to myself, looks good. Like the wheels looked good, and the platform looked good. The only thing that I saw wrong with it was one of the hand grips was sort of torn and shredded. She's glad that they didn't stop for the scooter. There were reasons why I didn't, but I didn't stop for the scooter. But it started me thinking. One of the things that gets me is spring is coming. I live in Beaconsfield. We are privileged to live in an incredibly wealthy area. All of us are, but we are. And I know that there's going to be countless garage sales in Beaconsfield in the spring. And after the garage sales are over, and people haven't bought all those bikes that are being sold in the garage sale, I'm going to be driving by a garbage day and seeing them in the garbage. Dozens and dozens and dozens. I was thinking, here's one of my crazy ideas. Talk about maybe connecting more. Tyndale St. George's in Little Burgundy. What do you think of the idea that we all do, collect people's garbage? Like the reasonable garbage, not the garbage, but the stuff that's just thrown out because the kids outgrown the bike, not because the bike's no good anymore. Just take it, and if it needs a new hand grip, let's provide some hand grips, cannibalize them off another bike, and build a whole bunch of bikes. And just call up Little Burgundy or Mile End Mission and say, I got a van full of bikes. Do you have any kids in your group who could use them? That's the way my mind works. And don't worry, we're not going to have a rational place we already do. She raised an eyebrow, she's scared of things like this. But the need is so great. There are kids in the city that don't have bikes. And bikes are ending up in the garbage and in the landfill that are perfectly good. And I just sort of wonder, if all of us allowed our minds to think, and to extend what we can come up with, that could really change lives and change societies. So there's my little practical reflection after a theoretical sermon. Now let's do another piece of music.